Well, with this sequence, I'm getting ready to create my rendering, and I'm going to do it for a turnaround on this character. So I'm going to, right now I have my character already with all the shading applied, all the texturing coming from substance. And additionally to that, I have in this scene a sky dome image that has a basic environment. Um, and then I have a directional light casting some shadow on the ground. If you can look at the shadows, it is casting by turning on the lights, and you can turn off the ambient occlusion there. um, I have a ground plane that is white. I'm going to change the ground plane to be better using a Arnold shadow matte. I'm going to assign that to the ground plane, and that will you see there the shadow from this, the directional light. I just have a sphere next to it, and there was for me testing refractions and refraction. You can see these objects reflecting the environment. I'm going to get rid of it. I don't need that. And I'm going to create a camera so I can use that for my rendering. I don't want to use my perspective camera just and to not move it by accident. I'm going to just bring the camera up here. Let me turn on my resolution gauge so I can see what my camera is seeing. Right there is okay. I'm gonna lock the camera, and I know that my character won't get out of my frame there. I'm gonna just go back to my perspective camera here to work. Just make sure that my character is on the ground but not too far below on the ground. So I'm just gonna bring this down a tiny bit. Just there, that's enough. Okay, and I'm going to animate this character is the grouped character that has no rig in it. You could use the rigged one, but of course that has to have received all the textures separately coming from Unreal. So this guy is not rigged, not bound to any skeleton. I'm going to just simply animate that, and I'm going to animate it in 120 frames. I'm just going to say keyframe on frame 1, and then I'm going to put a keyframe on frame 120. I'm going to rotate it negative 359 degrees. That way the first frame and the last frame are not the same. That way we'll have a smooth rotation. Oh, actually his pivot point I need to correct. I always forget about that. I'm just delete my keyframes and correct his pivot point. Press D, put it on what is roughly the base. There is D again. Alright, now I can animate it. So keyframe there, and negative 360. I'm sorry, 359. That way, last frame and first frame won't be exactly the same, so we won't snap or slow down for a moment there. Because so when I play back, make sure I have my real time checked on, and then just play it so I can see it. And you can see that he kind of slows in and slows out. So I'm going to correct that. So I'm going to change that by changing the graph editor here, animation graph editors, and change the rotation and Y tangency from that clamped version to linear. That way the rotation will be all continued and there is no slow in and slow out. That way when you play it back, it'll just be exactly the same rate. I'm seeing here, for example, that this piece is a bit jagged. So I'm going to correct that by just simply saying under modeling mesh display, I'm going to just put the soften and harden normals so that it tries to soften course, the smooth surfaces and make sharper the other ones. Geometry is a bit jagged, so press 3 on the keyboard, that will take care of it. But I needed to stay in 1 for the ambient occlusion, so I'm gonna keep this one on 1 as well. I'm gonna just apply the same trick so that my ambient occlusion and my wireframe, especially not my ambient occlusion, my wireframe provides a better result. So I'm just gonna keep it like that for now. And now I'm gonna be ready to set up my rendering with AOVs. Let me just do a quick test rendering here. See if I can look at my scene. I was testing him before, so let me just test it here one more time before I try my AOVs. Okay, there it is starting to render there. So it just finished in 11 seconds. Of course, at this point, it looks okay in terms of shading, but of course, in terms of samples, needs to be modified. So I'm gonna go and set up my render settings and go into the common tab here, and then the render, and then I'm gonna call it toy turn. Right, I'm gonna save it. I'm not going to do any XR. I'm going to do either a PNG or a TIFF would be okay. Let me just do PNGs here. I'm going to just save them as 16-bit. That way they will have transparency on them. I'm going to use view transform as my color space. Make sure I'm rendering out name, number, extension. And I'm going to render out 120 frames. My camera 1. And I'll render out the 1080p frame. Of course, that changes right away, and nothing else to change here. I'm gonna go to my sampling. I know it doesn't use any volumes. I don't have any subsurface in my shading. Transmission, I have a little bit transmission on his light, so I'm gonna keep that one at 2. I have specular for his reflection, of course. I have diffuse. The diffuse is very low right now, and if I look at my sampling, it's pretty low. So let me just do a quick little test here. Especially the shadow is one that you want to be paying attention to. And of course, we need to change the sampling of the light as well. But let me crank it up to 4 and test quickly there. Actually, before I do test it, I'm going to just crank up the sampling of the lighting. So I'm going to click on the sky dome, look at the attributes under the sky dome shape, and crank up the samples to 3. And I'm going to do the same thing for the directional light under the anvil section, samples to 3. That would improve my my shadows. I'm going to just test render that. Let me try to reduce this window a little bit because it's now using 1920 by 1080. So let me try that. My area might not be the right location. We'll see. Yeah, it's just somewhere else. So I'm going to try to move it here. And it improved, but not quite. Someone is just going to stop it there. I'm going to save this one just as a reference. And then I'm going to render out. I'm going to crank up this one to 4, the camera, and test it one more time. That made it a little bit better. Not absolutely better, but a little bit. You could compare the two. I'm gonna crank up this one to say 5 here, see what happens there, and then I don't see a big difference. Let me just make sure I'm looking at the right one. This is it. No big difference from that, so that means I'm gonna go bring this one down to 4 and then crank this one up to 5. That's a little bit better maybe. to save it there. Yeah, it improves a little bit. So I'm gonna try to keep it now there like that for now. That should work. And if my shadows are okay, which are the hardest ones to get, I think the rest of it will be fine. So I'm just gonna go with that, and then let me just take a look at maybe just sample one part of his body just quickly here, just to see. Let me see if I can go back to my window here. Just stop it rendering. Move it here. Come on, I cannot get it. Alright, here we go. Alright, that just finished there. And that seems pretty decent in terms of shadows, in terms of detail. Yeah, the light is a little bit jagged, but I'm gonna keep it like that just for my wireframe. I'm gonna just increment and save my scene here, and I'm gonna start setting up my AOVs. So as we said, AOVs are arbitrary output variables. That means they're kind of pre-created layers, and they work with Arnold. So especially with the standard shader and all of the Arnold shaders. So we are going to work on a number of AOVs to try to come up with a good compositing. Not all cases are the same, and it changes from project to project. So they have all these variables, and you can go on their website and look at the meaning of all these variables. The one we're going to try here are we're going to do albedo. We are going to do diffuse. We're going to do shadow matte. There's at the bottom shadow matte, I believe. There is shadow matte. We're going to try specular. There is specular direct, specular indirect. There's a bunch of different speculars. I'm going to do specular in general. And we're going to do for those, actually we're going to make these guys all using RGBA, which is alpha included, so that way they give us the transparency. And specular doesn't need an alpha actually. And I'm going to just test this ones quickly here just to see them, take a quick look at what they are doing. Not the window. Let me open up the right window here. Right. So there is, and if I put to render my, let me see if I can hide this. Put to render my camera. It'll start calculating. Of course, it's gonna take a little while because it's doing the whole thing. But once you click the first time to render, then all of the layers, all of the AOVs get added to your list here. So you can visualize them one by one. I'm gonna just do a region, that way it's a bit faster for me to see it and to show it. So that's the beauty. This is the albedo, which is very fast. This is the diffuse. This is the shadow matte, which has its challenges, and we're gonna have to do a little workaround in After Effects to make it work. And this is the specular. On top of that, we are going to add two more. And before I add two more, just making sure that you have clear for example, the shadow matte. If you look at the alpha, it has transparency in it. The diffuse also has transparency, and the albedo has transparency. So all of them have transparency, so that we can use that in After Effects. So it's important because that's why we want to have an RGBA, and you have to save them as PNGs in this case. We're going to do additionally to that the ambient occlusion. There is no ambient occlusion in this list here, so I'm going to add a custom AOV. I'm going to call it ambient occlusion. AMB OCC. Create that, And that one, let me just minimize this window here. That one actually does not have a connection anywhere here, so you need to actually select the AOV node and come to the attribute editor, and under the custom AOV we're gonna create a shader, and for that I'm gonna go and connect to the ambient occlusion shader that comes from Arnold. This one we don't have a sharper quality, so we're gonna crank up these samples around 16, 18, up to 20 would be a good number, and let me go and test that so that I can see it. I'm gonna have to click here again to add it, so now I can go to the ambient occlusion and you can see it rendering there, which is it's just okay. And we can use it slightly for, so let's give you a little bit of things here, but that should be fine. If I want to correct that, if I'm not happy about it, I could try smoothing that just for this, for that layer, for the AOV. I might have to render it out separately to create a better result for that. This one does a much better job for that. The challenge is that we're gonna have to do the wireframe separately. So, and we're gonna do that work just right now. So let me just create. I'm gonna add a custom. I'm gonna call this one a wireframe. That was added there, and same thing. We're gonna just select the wireframe. I'm gonna select the AOV node. I'm gonna add the shader here, and again we're going to make the wireframe. And here, of course, you gotta change it so that it's polygons that it's doing, and the fill color and the line color. You can decide which one you want to do, and I'm gonna just go to I'm going to do black lines. And you can decide how the width of it. And here is what I was going to say about when you use smooth, you see that it looks very, very heavy. So that is the part that, you know, it's great for the other layers of the AOVs, but not so good for this one. So you decide if you want to keep all of them smooth for all of the AOVs, and maybe you render the wireframe separately with, you press 1 on your keyboard, so that when you render it, the resolution is a lot lower and easier to show in your portfolio. I suggest you probably to do that. Just have a separate submission to render of the wireframe. You can just simply uncheck it here and then submit to render all of them at once, and then have a second round of rendering with the wireframe turned on and the other ones checked off. For now, I'm gonna just do that, and of course here I'm just going to just simply save my file and submit to render. So I'm gonna just go into my rendering menu set here. I'm gonna close this window, call my Maya rendering view, that way I can see it, and I go under my render. Of course, I'm gonna use sequence because we're using Arnold. You cannot render with batch. So all render enabled, layers, all camera enabled, add to render view, that way I can see it. You can pick an output, or normally it'll go to your images folder. It's up to you where you want to go, you want to send them, and I'm gonna just put this sequence to render here to make sure I save my file one last time, and then it goes. And of course, you start seeing your AOVs created and showing on your window, and of course you got to keep an eye on that for the first few frames. So I'm going to let mine just simply go there for a few hours and come back, and after that we'll work on our compositing in After Effects. I'm gonna stop it there. Just keep an eye on it and make sure that you're looking at where, you know, you see it's creating folders there for the location that is where the images are going. All right, we'll see when it's done, and we'll just do the After Effects compositing then.